Well, we started back in 1976 with my late father, and I just graduated high school, and we made a decision at that time to go, as they say, whole hog organic. If we remember back in 76, it was a drought year, much like this year. And so it was a good year to get into organics because nobody grew a crop anyhow. And so there was no measurement of success or failure in that first year. But we've been organic ever since. It's been a philosophy and a belief in ours that no harmful chemicals or products need to come onto our farm. Our family operation manages about 2,500 acres, about 1,600 of which is tillable. The balance is in pasture, meadow, tree sites, grasslands and such. We go through basically a 6-year standard rotation involving 5 different kinds of crops. We start at the top with oats as a nurse crop for seeding down alfalfa. And then the 2nd and 3rd year is alfalfa hay. The 4th year we go to soybeans. And then after soybeans, we broadcast winter rye as a green manure. And we work that in as a green manure crop for the 5th year, which is corn. And then the 6th year, we're back to soybeans one last time. And then year 7, we're back at the top of the rotation with oats as a small grain, serving as a nurse crop for the alfalfa. With our rotation, we have row crops on 50% of the time, which is the corn and soybean part of it. But the other 50% of the time, it's either oats and or alfalfa. And so we go back and forth between those 2 major components. And so it's smother crops on for 3 years, smother crops go off, then row crops for 3 years, and then we're back off the row crops and back onto smother crops. So it's always kind of a 50-50 balance. Well, there's a couple different advantages. One is it spreads out your workload throughout the year, so you're not dealing just with row crops and having to do all the planting and harvesting in just a few months of the year. So you have your other months of the year where you're harvesting hay, harvesting small grain, putting in small grain earlier in the planting season. Works well with a cow-calf operation, which we have, so we can feed that. So it basically keeps our farm team employed for 9 to 10 months out of the year versus just a couple. So we're mostly all self-employed here on the farm, and we hire very little outside labor. We depend on all of our 4 family members. I'd say in numbers terms, I think one operator could probably handle 600 to 700 acres. I think that's kind of the tipping point. Again, that's going to vary on management and the type of equipment, but you know, you get to a point where you're too big and it's not going to be successful for you either. Yet economics plays an important role. You've got to be viable enough to create enough income for the operation and to justify the right kind of equipment that comes into play on an organic farm. And the fact that we've got kind of a spin-off with my cousin Aaron, who is at about 700 acres now and about 500 tillable. Just seeing him kind of operate on his own by and large, he's fully employed. And for him to be any bigger, he'd either have to expand his partnership or labor force too. So, yeah. You know, I mean, the key phrase today now is cover crops. I mean, it's kind of a buzzword, not only in the organics, but the farm magazines in the conventional world. And I like to think with our rotation, we were cover crop even before the term even came around. You know, the fact that 50% of the time our ground is always under cover, either with the small grain or the alfalfa. And so I'm not being cynical about cover crops. In fact, I'm being promoting of them. It's just the matter of how we use them and when we use them. And you know, I like to think that organic farmers were the pioneers of cover crops long before there was a conventional world out there that recognized the benefits of it. So it's kind of like the rest of agriculture finally caught up with what organic was saying all these years. There's benefits to soil health and there's benefits to the soil management. The one concern I have a little bit is when we're putting our row crops in, we're kind of vulnerable until we get into more of a viable canopy stage. And so, you know, that would be one concern or aspect that we should be aware of is when we're getting our our corn and bean crops established, that we can be a little bit exposed to to bare ground. But I've seen these crops mature really fast. We usually plant late too. The other thing I mentioned, this volunteer oats that we're sowing down in the spring and then using that as a late green manure. Again, that gives us more surface organic matter on top of the ground going into planting our soybeans. And if you can plant row crops in that late May to early June time frame, you can get germination and row up within about 5 days. And when you got that, you're ahead of the weeds, and you also got a crop that's coming on really fast, and almost within 30 days you can have canopy covering your ground. I'm somewhat of a promoter of fall tillage. I know that might not be what's in the game phraseology today, but I think for us, for our soils to be open and warming up in the spring is important. I think incorporating crop residue is important. I think self-awareness is a lot of it. There's no set date as to when you should be planting corn and beans. For me to say, well, optimum is May 15th or the optimum is 1st of June. No, every year is different, and you need to play the weather by your best hunches. But late planting, which allows for rapid and quick germination in warm and moist soil, is the optimum conditions to getting row crops going. From the number standpoint, since late May, we've only had less than 2 inches of rain in small amounts in those 2 months. Before that, the month of May was extremely dry. At that time, it was more of a cold, dry month. We had a fair amount of snow and moisture in the winter months, but not a lot. Last year in this area, we were dry from middle of July right on through harvest. I'd say the last 12 calendar months, probably less than 12 inches of rain in this area, which is really extreme. But I think the fact that our rotation is working for us, the organic matter levels in our soils are high and bountiful, that I think to some degree we're being drought resistant here. I'm not saying we're not being hurt, we certainly are, but I think that our crops, at least at this point, have a fighting chance to hang on and make us a modest crop. And I think it's just due to our good organic farming. Again, I think, observation is the best witness. And, with the amount of rain we had, any other story would have told you that the corn would be only knee-high and brown by now. And the fact that it isn't, the fact that we came in with at least a modest amount of small grain harvest, the fact that our grass and alfalfa is still hanging on, and we're set. Our soybeans, as we walked into them earlier, are still very viable. I mean, if we do get some rains in August, we could have a fair to good crop yet. And so, again, it's just organic farming is a foundation, not just for the year that you plant or work with the soil, but it's a foundation you build upon for years to come. I think a lot of it is timing. A lot of it is size perspective. We're a fairly large operation when it comes to an organic aspect, but we are employing 4 partners. But I see that the same amount of acres that we operate or manage under a conventional system, there'd probably only be allowance for 1 or 2 operators. And so toss out all the argument about organic food or the betterment of soil health, just the aspect of organic farming where you're involving diversity and breadth of rotation. You're bringing more people back into agriculture itself. And so take aside all the other arguments of better or worse. It's better to have organic if you want a real farming community out there in terms of churches, schools, people, shopping centers, and small towns. Organic farming requires more management, and with that, more people. And this is what we really need back in the farming community, is people coming first. I've been told too that we don't just raise crops out here, we raise families and children. And just like, my partner Aaron Johnson and his young family, If it wasn't for organic farming, he probably wouldn't be back on his dad's house and farm. And then it'd be just one less family that's being educated here, one less family that's going to church here and shopping here locally. For example, just like with weed control, most conventional farmers, especially with the huge sizes of fields and acres that they operate, it's very intense when it comes to planting season and spraying season. But basically you get beyond a point where the spraying is done, the planting is done, they're underemployed. Even though they may be operating thousands of acres, they're underemployed for 3 or 4 months until harvest time comes around, and then they're super busy again. With the organic operation, keeping it at a modest to fairly large size, but spreading out that rotation and workload, we're basically on the job, on the go, keeping ourselves employed, from April right on through October and November. Well, I think implementing and working with a very viable crop rotation is utmost of importance. And also, keeping a good bookkeeping system from marketing, where you're dealing with lot numbers and loads going out to different end users or buyers. Tracking what happens on your farm in terms of what seed you're using, what practices you're using, when you're planting, when you're harvesting. So maintaining a good field record is viable for organic, and it's just good management practice regardless. The best teacher is the best listener, and you would probably be best to be able to listen to a farmer, listen to a client, listen to others that are in the field and learn from them. I think anybody in the organic world that comes about thinking they have all the answers is almost like a false prophet. As I mentioned on the tour itself, organic always throws a different curve at you every year, and I've been at it for almost 40 years. And if you think you've got it licked after 39 and a half, year 40 is going to turn you for a table. And so the best way to handle things is be ready to eat some humble pie every year. And when you get to learning how to do that, I think in the end you become a better operator and a better educator of what organic is all about. That it's learning on the fly, on your feet, on the tractor, and using your best judgment. And the other thing I would encourage to is don't doubt yourself, don't overly second guess yourself, because I can pretty much assure you that 95% of the time your first hunch is the right hunch.
After having a good discussion with Charlie, we took a look at some of his fields to see why they might be more drought resilient than other fields in the area.
So we're in an organic soybean field here, and just wanted to dig up these plants that haven't had any rain since May, just about 2 inches, so very dry, drought-like conditions. And when I dug them up, I was just surprised at the amount of soil that is still sticking to the roots. This is an indication of the root exudates, the sugars and the organic glues that are very prevalent in these soils. Even though the soils are so dry, they're helping the soil colloids to be in really good structure right close to the root zone. So that's helping deliver more nutrients into the plant. It's an indication of high organic matter, high microbial activity in these soils. And if we look out over the soybean field, considering it's only gotten 2 inches of rain since May, that's just an indication of what organics, when we're building up that organic matter and the organic glues, exudates from the root zone into the soil, what that can do. So the other thing I wanted to point out here was just that when I dug up these plants, the amount of moisture and coolness within this root zone, I mean, I can get my whole fist into the soils. There's still enough moisture that I can form a clump with my hands, despite the fact that these fields haven't had more than 2 inches of rain since May. So just an indication of the power of organic glues that are exuded from the root zone and helping to make these soybeans really resilient in light of the really tough field conditions this season with the weather.